I thought the worst part of the blizzard would be the cold. The kind that bites through gloves and settles into your bones, making every breath hurt. I was wrong. The cold was nothing compared to what came later. For 18 straight hours, I pushed snow through streets no one else wanted to touch. Not for money. Not for recognition. Just to make sure people could get out if they needed help. Elderly neighbors. Families with kids. People who looked like me and people who didn't. In moments like that, you don't think about rules or titles. You think about survival. But when the storm finally passed, something else rolled in. Something uglier. Something quieter than wind, but far more dangerous. A piece of paper. Bright. Official. Slapped onto my door like a warning. An $800 fine for doing the one thing I thought still mattered, helping. They didn't call it kindness. They didn't call it community. They called it a violation. Unauthorized. Unacceptable. And the tone behind it made one thing painfully clear: in this neighborhood, someone like me was never allowed to be the hero. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was the message. That my effort was suspicious. That my presence was a problem. That helping people during a disaster somehow crossed a line I was never meant to approach. I stood there in the freezing air, holding that notice, realizing this was never just about snow. It was about power. Control. And the quiet kind of racism that hides behind policies and smiles while it decides who belongs, and who doesn't. But what they didn't know was this: that fine didn't scare me. It woke something up. And what happened next forced an entire community to face the truth they'd been avoiding. Because once you punish someone for doing the right thing, you expose far more than rules. You expose yourself. And that's when the real storm began. Before the blizzard, my life in Maple Ridge Estates was quiet in the way grief teaches you to appreciate. Predictable mornings. Long work days. Evenings that revolved around my twins, Megan and Tyler, trying to rebuild something that felt like normal after losing their mother. I was a union electrician, the kind of job where your hands tell your story before your mouth ever does. Calloused. Scarred. Honest. We moved here because it looked safe. Clean streets. Smiling neighbors. A place where people waved instead of stared. I told myself it was a fresh start. A place where effort mattered more than appearance. Where doing the right thing still counted for something. Most days, it felt true. Kids rode bikes. Mrs. Elise baked cookies that smelled like warmth and memory. Bob, the old Vietnam vet down the street, nodded at me like we shared an understanding that words couldn't improve. I kept my head down, paid my dues, followed the rules, and stayed out of trouble. But there was always an edge beneath the politeness. The kind you notice in lingering looks. In how some people watched instead of waved. In how authority spoke slower to me, louder, as if volume could replace respect. I didn't call it racism back then. I told myself I was imagining things. That keeping quiet was easier. Then the storm came. And with it, a chance to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I belonged here just as much as anyone else. That I wasn't just tolerated. That I mattered. I had no idea that by helping my neighbors survive a blizzard, I was about to become a problem they couldn't ignore. Because once the snow stopped falling, the real test of this neighborhood began, and it wasn't about weather at all. The fine wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning. Once that orange notice appeared on my door, everything shifted. Neighbors who used to wave started watching instead. Conversations stopped when I stepped onto the sidewalk. Doors closed faster than before. The same streets I'd plowed for free now felt narrower, colder, like they were quietly pushing back. Within days, more letters came. Official. Heavy with authority. Accusations dressed up as policy. Unauthorized activity. Community risk. Liability concerns. They never said my name without attaching the word problem to it. What hurt most was how quickly kindness was rewritten as suspicion. I didn't become the guy who helped during a storm. I became the guy who needed to be controlled. Then the meetings started. Emergency HOA gatherings that felt anything but neutral. Long tables. Tight smiles. Papers stacked like weapons. I sat there listening as my actions were dissected, twisted, framed as something dangerous. No one talked about the elderly woman who could finally leave her house. No one mentioned the families who slept knowing an ambulance could reach them. Instead, they talked about rules. About precedent. About how someone like me shouldn't take initiative without permission. That's when I understood this wasn't really about snow. It was about who was allowed to step up, and who wasn't. The same behavior praised in others became a violation when it came from me. The same effort labeled community service suddenly looked like defiance. The pressure escalated fast. My truck was photographed. My movements tracked. I was fined again, this time for parking in my own driveway. Then again for a yard violation buried under snow. Each citation felt smaller on paper but heavier in my chest. It was death by 1,000 cuts, meant to exhaust me, embarrass me, and remind me of my place. Worse than the fines was the narrative. Flyers appeared warning neighbors about unauthorized individuals. Online posts hinted that I was running some kind of scam, that I was unsafe, that I didn't belong. I watched lies spread faster than the storm ever did, and I realized how easily fear could be weaponized when it already had a target. At night, anger kept me awake. Not explosive anger, controlled, simmering rage. The kind that asks why doing the right thing always seems to cost more when you look like me. The kind that forces you to decide whether to back down or stand firm, knowing either choice has consequences. Then they crossed a line. They went after my kids. Subtle at first. Their summer jobs suddenly unavailable. Privileges quietly revoked. Opportunities erased without explanation. I saw confusion on Megan and Tyler's faces, and something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about me anymore. I started digging, reading, connecting dots. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became that I wasn't the first, and wouldn't be the last, unless someone stopped it. What I found next changed everything. Because the system punishing me wasn't just unfair. It was rotten. And once I saw the truth, there was no turning back. The night of the hearing felt heavier than the storm ever had. The community room was packed wall to wall, the air thick with tension and whispers that stopped when I walked in. Faces turned. Some full of support. Others cold, guarded, already convinced I was guilty of something they couldn't quite name. I took my seat knowing this was exactly where they wanted me, alone, exposed, outnumbered. Then she stood up. Calm. Polished. Confident. The HOA president spoke like a judge delivering a verdict that had already been decided. She called my actions reckless. Dangerous. Claimed I put the entire neighborhood at risk. Her words were sharp, carefully chosen, and laced with something familiar, the assumption that I needed to be put back in my place. Photographs appeared on the screen. My truck. My plow. Me helping neighbors. Ordinary moments twisted into evidence. Each image felt like a punch to the chest. The room murmured as if they were watching a crime unfold, not acts of kindness during a crisis. My hands clenched. My heart pounded. For a moment, I wondered if this was how it ended, with my reputation dismantled piece by piece while I stood there powerless. Then the narrative cracked. Neighbors stood up. One after another. An elderly woman describing how she would have been trapped without help. A veteran admitting the snow could have killed him. Parents talking about sick children who needed access to the road. Their voices trembled, but they didn't stop. And suddenly, the room shifted. The truth hit like a shockwave. Documents surfaced. Numbers didn't line up. Conflicts of interest spilled into the open. The same people accusing me of wrongdoing were exposed for profiting while others suffered. Gasps filled the room. The confidence on her face drained fast, replaced by panic she couldn't hide. I realized then this wasn't just my fight anymore. It never had been. This was about a system that punished compassion when it came from the wrong person, and protected greed when it wore the right mask. As officials stepped forward and the room erupted, one thought cut through the chaos: this moment would change everything. But the real consequences were still ahead, and the aftermath would be just as powerful. And the weeks that followed, the neighborhood went quiet in a way that felt different from before. The hearing ended with consequences, real ones. Investigations were opened. Positions were suspended. Rules were rewritten. On paper, it looked like justice. But justice doesn't erase what lingers in the body after you've been treated like a threat for simply existing. I went back to my routine because that's what survival teaches you to do. Work. Home. Repeat. But something had shifted inside me. I no longer mistook silence for peace or politeness for acceptance. I had seen how quickly gratitude could turn into suspicion, how easily help could be reframed as danger when it came from someone who didn't fit the image people were comfortable with. Some neighbors apologized. Others avoided eye contact. A few acted as if nothing had happened at all. And maybe that was the hardest part, the reminder that racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles, nods, and waits for the right moment to show itself. Yet there was impact beyond me. People spoke up who never had before. Meetings changed. Conversations got uncomfortable, and that mattered. Because discomfort is often the first step toward truth. My children watched all of it, learning lessons I never wanted them to need, but knowing they would. Lessons about standing firm, about dignity, about refusing to shrink to make others comfortable. This story didn't end with applause or perfect closure. It ended with awareness. With scars that became reminders. With the understanding that injustice survives when it's ignored, and weakens when it's confronted. Racism isn't always loud, but it is always costly. The question is not whether it still exists. The question is how many people will keep looking away when it shows up quietly at their own doorstep.